The ballroom glittered in gold and glass. Crystal chandeliers above. Custom name cards below. Laughter bouncing off white linen and old wine. It was my father's 60th birthday. He stood at the head table like a self-appointed king, surrounded by his kingdom, my siblings, their picture-perfect spouses, his colleagues, golf buddies, and legacy friends who'd never once asked about me. I was seated near the end of the row. Not quite in the shadows, but not in the light either. And beside me? My son, 17. Bright eyes. Jaw clenched. He already sensed something I hadn't said out loud, that this wasn't a celebration.
It was a ceremony.
A reminder of hierarchy. A reminder of where I stood. Dad clinked his glass. The room hushed. He raised his voice like he always did when he wanted applause before finishing the sentence. Family, he began, is everything.
Nods.
Murmurs. Toasts raised. Then his smile shifted, just enough to signal what was coming. Family is everything, except for those who clean bathrooms and make other people's mistakes. Laughter erupted.
Loud.
Too loud.
Some looked at me.
Most didn't. My sister laughed hardest. My brother gave a toast without drinking nod. And my mother? She just dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin and avoided my eyes. I didn't move. Not at first. The shame settled over me like a second skin, familiar, suffocating. But then my son's hand found mine under the table. He didn't squeeze it. He just held it. Steady. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope I'd brought just in case. Just in case he did what he always did, reminded the room that I was never really one of them. I stood, walked to the head table, and with every step, the laughter died. I placed the envelope next to his wine glass, looked him in the eye, and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. He knew, and he would soon know what that envelope contained. Then I turned to my son and said, "Let's go." We walked toward the door, and just as I touched the handle, my son let go of my hand, turned back to the crowd, and said, clear and unshaking, "You all laughed at the woman who cleaned your messes. But she's the only one in this room who owns something none of you do." The air snapped. Every wine glass might as well have shattered. He continued, "That beach house you all vacation in? She owns it. Deed signed. Taxes paid. Name on every document. And tomorrow, none of you are welcome."
Gasps.
Chairs scraped. No one laughed now, because a child just reminded them what shame sounds like when it wears truth. We walked out. Not in anger. In power. My name is Elena Shaw. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Because the night they laughed at me for cleaning their messes was the night I swept them out of the story for good. Bathroom girl. That's what my sister used to call me when she thought I couldn't hear. She'd whisper it loud enough for cousins to giggle and quiet enough for adults to pretend they didn't notice. But I always did. And I carried it heavier than any mop bucket or laundry basket. Teen pregnancy had turned me into a cautionary tale in our perfect family. When I told my father at 17 that I was expecting, he didn't yell. He didn't even scold. He just folded his newspaper and said, "You chose your path. Now walk it alone."
And I did.
While my siblings went to universities, took trips abroad, got internships at firms with last names that meant something, I scrubbed bathroom floors and vacuumed hotel lobbies, with my infant son sleeping in a stroller park nearby. I cleaned bathrooms at night, office cubicles at dawn, and during the day I cleaned homes, mansions, condos, sometimes even the houses of my father's own friends. They'd see me but never quite look me in the eye. They would offer coffee in chipped cups, then pay late with tight smiles. But I took it. Every dirty job. Every whispered nickname. Because my son deserved better than shame. My father once told my sister, "You're the family's hope." He told my brother, "You're the family's pride." And me? I was never part of that conversation. But there was one person who saw past the labels, my grandfather. He visited one rainy afternoon, the baby crying softly in his bassinet. Grandpa sat on my faded couch, looked around my cramped apartment, and said, quietly, "They say you're lost. but I see a girl who's quietly building something. Remember, bricks don't shout when they're laid, but they hold everything up. And when Grandpa passed, he left me something nobody expected. Not money. Not stock portfolios. A small house on the coast. Nothing fancy, but solid. Quiet. Something he'd bought years ago as an investment. A place no one else wanted because it wasn't glamorous enough. He wrote in his letter, "You built your life from the ground up. Now here's some ground that belongs only to you." But I didn't tell anyone. I simply paid every mortgage bill, quietly repaired every crack, and painted every fading wall, silently keeping the deed tucked away. My father bragged about our family house to his golf buddies. He entertained friends on the porch I'd sanded down myself. They never thanked me. They never even knew it was mine. But I knew. And my son knew. Because that night, at my father's grand celebration, with him mocking the woman who cleaned their toilets, I realized something. They hadn't just dismissed me. They'd underestimated me. They believed their laughter made me small. But I had already laid down every brick in silence. And while they toasted family and forgot my name, I owned the very floor beneath their feet. When Grandpa handed me the deed, he made me promise two things. Never apologize for owning what's yours. And never explain yourself to people who refuse to understand. So I didn't. For 7 years, I held the deed in silence. While my father hosted parties there, laughing loudly enough to drown out his shameful daughter's memory, I quietly paid every bill. While my siblings took weekend selfies on the balcony, captioning posts with phrases like "family legacy," I was fixing the roof, sanding splintered floorboards, and painting walls that echoed only my own voice. They didn't notice, because they never needed to. The day after my father's cruel toast, when the laughter had finally died and the embarrassment began to burn, the house phone rang off the hook. I didn't answer. The messages stacked up. From my sister, fake tears and feigned confusion. "Elena, why would you humiliate Dad like that? Call me back." From my brother, angry, entitled. "That property belongs to the family. You can't just claim it. Let's talk." But most of all from my father, voice tight, brittle as old paper. "Elena, this is ridiculous. You've made your point. Be sensible." Sensible. They still thought this was about proving a point. They didn't understand that I wasn't punishing them. I was protecting what had always been mine. When I first inherited the house, I went quietly to the courthouse and had the deed filed legally, precisely, under my name. I had the locks changed. I stored the papers safely. Grandpa knew this day would come. He knew my father would try to take credit, my siblings would treat it like a luxury hotel, and my mother would pretend not to notice any of it. But he trusted me to stand firm, quietly. And now, at last, I did. I returned to the coastal house alone, my son by my side. The sun was setting gently over the water, spilling orange and pink onto the porch I'd rebuilt by hand. We stepped inside. My son turned to me, thoughtful. "You never told them. You could have shown them any time." I nodded, watching the sea through the window. "I never needed them to know. I just needed to keep this place safe." "But they took advantage of you for years," he said quietly. I met his eyes. They thought they did. But every moment they ignored me, I grew stronger. Every dinner they mocked me, I tightened my grip. They thought silence meant weakness. But silence was always my armor. He smiled softly. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." I looked out again. Strength is easy when you have something worth protecting. The phone buzzed once more. Another voicemail. My father, voice strained. "Elena, you can't isolate yourself forever. Please call." I turned the ringer off. Because I wasn't isolating myself. I was liberating myself. I hung Grandpa's framed photo on the wall, beside the deed he'd signed, then quietly placed the eviction notice on the front table, ready to mail, ready to file. The house was mine, fully and legally. They couldn't touch it. And as the waves crashed gently outside, I knew something deeply true. They never heard me in that ballroom. But here, my silence spoke louder than their laughter ever could. Leaving the banquet hall felt like stepping out of water after years of holding my breath. Behind me, the room was still suspended in stunned silence. My father's face had twisted from mocking confidence to shocked disbelief as he stared at the envelope, now opened, revealing the undeniable truth. The deed was mine. The oceanfront home they cherished and bragged about. It had never been theirs to give or take. Grandpa had quietly ensured that. But before I reached the exit, my son stopped abruptly. He squeezed my hand once, then gently let go. I paused, watching as he turned back toward the crowd, his shoulders squared, chin lifted, facing the sea of judgmental eyes. For 17 years, my son had quietly watched these people diminish me, dismiss me, and treat me like their disposable maid. But he was done being quiet. The room stilled, every eye on him. Then, clearly, steadily, he spoke. You all laughed at the woman who cleaned up after your messes. But none of you realized she owned the very ground you stand on. That beach house you bragged about, the one you vacationed in without ever thanking her, it belongs to her. Not Grandpa. Not any of you. Her. No one moved. Not even my father, whose face had turned a shade paler. My sister's forced smile vanished, replaced by an expression caught between confusion and dread. My brother's eyes darted toward the envelope, searching for a way out. There wasn't one. My son's voice grew stronger, carrying the confidence I'd always hoped he'd have, but feared he'd lose in the shadow of our family's cruelty. For years, you pretended my mother was beneath you because she cleaned your floors. But she was quietly building something none of you could ever buy, dignity. And now, she's taking back what was hers all along. Someone cleared their throat nervously. My father started to speak, to regain control, but my son raised a hand calmly. Don't. You've said enough. You made your toast and now we've made ours. He turned back to me, steady, sure. Ready, Mom? I nodded, my heart swelling. Not with revenge, but pride. We stepped outside, leaving behind the stunned silence of a room finally forced to see the truth clearly. In the parking lot, the night felt lighter. The humiliation that had clung to me for years finally slid off my shoulders, replaced by something I'd rarely known.
Peace.
I'm proud of you, I told him quietly. He smiled. I learned strength from watching you. As we drove home, my phone buzzed again and again. My father, siblings, even distant cousins calling, texting, messages ranging from anger to hollow apologies. I didn't answer, because tonight wasn't about their regret. It was about finally claiming space that had always belonged to me, yet I'd never been brave enough to occupy. And when we reached the coast, stepping into the home I'd secretly owned for years, it felt different this time. The air wasn't heavy with obligation. It was clear with possibility. My son looked around, taking it all in. You deserve this, he said softly. I touched his cheek. We both do. Because they'd thought their laughter would silence me forever. Instead, it was the catalyst that finally freed me. And now, standing in this house, built on quiet dignity and reclaimed strength, I realized something powerful. My silence hadn't been submission. It had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. And at last, my voice echoed louder than their laughter ever could. The first night at the beach house felt like breathing clean air after years in smoke. I stood on the balcony, moonlight dancing softly across the ocean waves, a glass of wine in hand, quiet strength wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. My phone buzzed on the table, calls from numbers I'd deleted years ago. But tonight, I let them ring unanswered. My family's panic, their anger, their demands, I no longer belonged to any of it. By morning, the messages had piled up. My sister, voice tight. Elena, you've made your point. Stop this. My brother, pretending sympathy. Dad's crushed. Think about what you're doing to him. But the last voicemail from my father himself revealed the deepest fracture. You've humiliated us all. If you don't reverse this, you're not part of this family anymore.
I didn't reply.
Instead, I drove into town. By noon, a locksmith arrived, swapping old locks with sleek, secure ones. The faded family photos came down, replaced by artwork I'd chosen, calm, hopeful scenes. At the front gate, I posted a clear sign. Private property. No access without written permission. Neighbors noticed. Some smiled. Others nodded knowingly. No surprise, no judgment. They'd always quietly suspected who truly kept this place standing. But by evening, my father's lawyer called. Stern, authoritative. Your father intends to contest the deed. We suggest reconsidering your position. I paused, then replied calmly. Contest all you'd like. The deed is recorded, notarized, and beyond challenge. Tell my father he's welcome to waste his money, just like he wasted years mocking the daughter who quietly outgrew him. The line went silent. Then, softer. Understood. Days passed. I cleaned every inch of that house, my house, removing fingerprints of family who never loved me. Furniture rearranged. Fresh paint. New linens. Each change a small victory, each room a reclaiming of myself. My son watched quietly, pride shining in his eyes. They're scared now, he said softly one evening. Why? He smiled. Because they never expected the girl who cleaned their bathrooms to own the place they bragged about. A week later, I received a handwritten letter. From my father, short, cold, formal. Elena, you have disrupted family harmony. For the sake of peace, return the property. We're willing to discuss conditions. I replied with one line. Harmony died when your laughter drowned out my worth. I never heard from his lawyer again. Days later, another letter arrived, different handwriting this time. Gentle, shaky. My mother. I should have stood up for you. I'm sorry I never did. Keep the house. Keep your peace. I folded her letter softly. She'd been a silent bystander. But even silent bystanders pay a price.
And now?
They paid mine. I didn't want revenge. I wanted closure. A life built quietly, beautifully, on my terms. Without permission. As the waves whispered gently at night, and the house around me settled into quiet strength, I understood. The laughter that hurt me once had become distant noise, drowned by the clarity of finally taking back what was mine. The girl who cleaned bathrooms and made mistakes had quietly built something powerful. A home. A future. A legacy not rooted in shame, but grown in quiet defiance. The fallout was swift, fierce, and entirely self-inflicted. It started with whispers, little rumors twisting through my father's social circle like ivy. Whispers about the grand party ruined, about the family heirloom house that was never actually theirs, about the daughter they had mocked for cleaning bathrooms, who now owned the crown jewel of their reputation. I didn't spread them. I didn't need to. Their panic spread the truth for me. My brother was the first to publicly react, an angry Facebook post calling me selfish, claiming I'd torn the family apart. It backfired spectacularly. Dozens commented beneath. Didn't your sister pay every bill for years? So the bathroom girl kept your family afloat? He quickly deleted it, but screenshots lingered. My sister tried another approach, soft victimhood. She posted cryptic quotes about betrayal, family bonds, and blood being thicker than water. Someone replied simply, but deeds are thicker than blood. The comment went viral overnight. Dad, however, said nothing publicly. He let his silence shout. His golf buddies started canceling weekend plans, suddenly busy. His colleagues distanced themselves quietly, not wanting to be attached to the spectacle. A reputation he'd carefully built over decades now fractured under the weight of one simple truth. He mocked the daughter, who had silently supported them all. Then came the article. A local blogger, curious about town whispers, wrote a piece titled, "The Daughter They Forgot, How Elena Shaw Quietly Reclaimed Her Legacy." It detailed my life, the teen pregnancy, my years scrubbing toilets, the silent inheritance from my grandfather, and the now infamous birthday toast where everything unraveled. My son's words were quoted prominently. You laughed at the woman who cleaned your messes, but she owned the ground beneath your feet. Overnight, the piece spread, resonating deeply. I received hundreds of messages. From strangers, yes, but also from local women, mothers, daughters who'd felt unseen. They thanked me for holding quiet strength in the face of humiliation. But the message that stopped me was from an old teacher, Mrs. Calloway. You were never the bathroom girl to me. You were the brave girl who built something beautiful from nothing. I cried quietly over that one, not from sadness, but from relief. Someone had always seen me clearly. Meanwhile, my family tried to rally. One afternoon, I received a thick envelope containing legal threats and demands, each desperate, each meaningless. I forwarded them to my attorney, who dismissed them effortlessly. Then one day, my son came home smiling, showing me his phone. His speech had gone viral on TikTok. Millions watched him defend his mother's dignity, his strength clear, calm, and true. Comments poured in, calling him brave, me inspiring, our bond beautiful. But his favorite was simple. This kid just ended generational cruelty, with one sentence. He smiled quietly. Maybe they'll finally get it. I touched his shoulder gently. Even if they don't, we finally did. The phone buzzed one last time. My father again. I answered just once.
His voice was different now.
No anger. Only exhaustion. Elena, this has gone too far. I replied gently, but firmly.
No.
You went too far. I just stopped pretending it was okay. Then I hung up, my heartbeat steady, my strength settled. Because I wasn't fighting anymore. I didn't have to. They had underestimated me for years. Assuming silence was weakness. Now they knew better. And me? I finally understood the difference between forgiveness and permission. I could forgive them, quietly from a distance, but I'd never again seek their permission to matter. I didn't plan to become a hero. I just wanted to live openly, without apology. But sometimes the quietest rebellion is the loudest lesson. The article changed things. Invitations poured in, conferences, podcasts, women's leadership events. At first, I declined politely. I'd spent years in quiet corners, cleaning up after others. Speaking out publicly felt foreign, uncomfortable. But then my son gently placed one invitation on the table. He looked at me, serious yet soft. Mom, maybe it's time they hear your voice. Not for them, for you. So, I said yes. The first time I spoke publicly, my hands shook behind the podium. The room was filled with women, some polished, some uncertain, all leaning in, hungry for honesty. I took a breath and began simply. My name is Elena Shaw, and I used to clean bathrooms. That's what my family remembered about me. But what they forgot is that I also cleaned their messes. And while they laughed, I quietly built something they couldn't buy, my dignity. The applause startled me. Not polite applause, raw, genuine, fierce. Women came up afterward, shaking my hand, hugging me tightly. They whispered, "You told my story. Thank you for speaking for us." My confidence grew with each stage. And soon something else grew too. A vision. Using my savings, I launched Second Chances Cleaning, a business to empower single mothers and overlooked women. No shame, no stigma. Just dignity, training, and a living wage. The idea exploded. Contracts poured in, businesses eager to align with a cause that felt like justice. The beach house became our headquarters, a safe haven for retreats, training, healing. A place that had been built in silence, now overflowed with the laughter of women discovering their power. One evening, my son stood beside me on that familiar balcony, looking out over the ocean. "You built something amazing, Mom." "No." I smiled. "We built this. You stood up when I couldn't. Your voice gave me back mine." He nodded softly. "But you taught me courage. Every silent sacrifice. Every late night scrubbing floors so I could sleep safely." Then he handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked, cautious. "Open it." Inside was a college acceptance letter, full scholarship. "I got it," he said quietly. "I'm going to study law. To defend people like you. People who deserve a voice." I hugged him tight, pride fierce in my chest. He'd become exactly who I'd always dreamed he could be, strong, kind, unbreakable. That weekend, the women of Second Chances surprised us with a gathering. They filled the house with laughter, hope, and celebration. Flowers covered the tables, lights twinkled softly, music played. And when I stood up to thank them, one woman raised her glass. To Elena, the bathroom girl who cleaned up our shame and became our champion. Everyone cheered, because the name once meant to mock me had transformed into something powerful: resilience,
Pride.
ownership. I smiled, lifting my glass. But the toast I held silently in my heart was simpler. To the girl they thought they buried. To the woman who quietly grew through concrete. To the mother whose child finally silenced the laughter. Because my rise wasn't revenge, it was reclaiming. And I had reclaimed every moment, every inch, every breath of my life. The knock at the door was soft. I knew who it was before I opened it. Standing outside was my father. Older now, shoulders slightly bowed, expression quiet in a way I'd never seen before. "Can we talk?" His voice lacked the edge it once carried. I considered closing the door, sending him away like he'd done to me countless times before. But instead, I stepped onto the porch. We stood together in the soft, golden dusk, ocean murmuring in the distance, gentle as a whisper. "I didn't come to fight," he began quietly. "I've done enough of that. I don't need apologies," I said calmly. "It's too late for that." He nodded, looking toward the sea. "I know. I came here to admit something I never had the courage to face." I waited silently, giving him space. "You were always stronger than us," he continued softly. "Stronger than me. You took everything we threw at you, the jokes, the cruelty, the silence, and you quietly turned it into something good." His gaze shifted toward me, eyes damp but clear. "I mocked you that night because it was easier to laugh than admit you'd grown into someone far beyond what I could control." I didn't respond. I just listened. "When you left that envelope on the table, it wasn't just the deed you reclaimed. It was your dignity, the dignity we should have honored but never did." For the first time, his voice broke slightly. "I'm proud of you, Elena. Proud you built something beautiful, even though I spent years telling you that you couldn't." I exhaled slowly, the ocean breeze lifting my hair gently. "I didn't build it for your pride," I said softly. "I built it because you left me no other choice. And now that it's built, it doesn't need your approval to stand." He nodded, understanding fully. We stood in silence a moment more, the space between us no longer filled with resentment, just quiet acceptance. Finally, he spoke again. "Can I ask for one thing?" I waited. "Forgiveness." I paused, then replied honestly. "I forgave you a long time ago, not for you, but for me. I won't carry the bitterness you gave me. But forgiveness doesn't mean letting you back in." He accepted this without protest, quietly respectful. "Thank you for letting me say my piece." He turned slowly, walking away down the path, shoulders still bent, but lighter now, as though he'd finally put down a heavy load. My son appeared quietly at my side, watching him go. "You okay?" he asked gently. I smiled softly.
Yes.
Because I no longer need anything from him, not even an apology. He nodded, calm, wise beyond his years. "You gave yourself everything they withheld from you." I touched his shoulder gently. "No," I corrected quietly. "We gave each other strength to reclaim our story." We stood there until the sun dipped fully below the horizon, its colors fading gently into darkness. I closed the door, locking it securely, locking out the past that no longer defined me. In the quiet of my home, surrounded by memories I had chosen, I felt peace. And my final thought was this. They once laughed at me for cleaning their messes. But the woman they mocked had quietly built something no one could ever tear down. They said I was nothing. But from nothing, I built everything. And now, standing quietly on the foundation I poured, I finally learned my voice never needed volume to be heard. It just needed courage.